This hearing of the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee is now called to order, and I'd like to begin by welcoming FDA Commissioner Dr. Robert Califf, and thank you for being here today. I look forward to discussing the fiscal year 2025 budget request for the FDA. The responsibilities of the Food and Drug Administration are vast and impact the lives of nearly every American. We need to ensure we have the resources to continue your critical mission, and I'm committed to working with you during the appropriations process to provide the funding that you need. That begins now with the fiscal year 2025 budget request that's in front of us. The request includes a total of $3.695 billion in discretionary funding, a $168 million increase, a relatively modest increase for this agency. I'm interested in hearing about your priorities within this budget request, Dr. Califf, and what role this committee can play in ensuring we continue to have the world's safest food and drug supply. I will say that I am frustrated with FDA's lack of urgency in regulating the tobacco products and e-cigarettes that are flooding the market, and I'm also concerned with highly pathogenic avian influenza and its potential impact to our food supply. I continue to be interested in investing resources in our domestic infant formula supply as we continue to recover from the 2022 formula crisis. All of these issues continue to be public health threats to our nation, and the FDA should be using all tools available to address them. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these issues and what FDA is doing to address them. Dr. Califf, I want to reiterate my continued support for FDA and the dedicated employees at your agency. Last year, we had to make some pretty difficult budget decisions under grim spending caps, and I'm afraid that it is likely this year will not be much better. That's why it's important for us to hear your priorities and the priorities of members of this committee. And thanks again for being here, and I'll turn things over to my ranking member, Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Califf, thanks for being here and for your service as the leader at FDA, incredibly important position. I know it's been a busy time since your return as commissioner from COVID-19 pandemic to the infant formula crisis and the current highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak, which we'll talk about a little bit, among dairy cattle, as well as ongoing drug and device shortages. So all of that on top of what you have to do every single day, which is, of course, to keep the food and drug supply safe for, well more than 300 million Americans. Your agency has authority over 160 foreign establishments and 160,000 foreign establishments and 135,000 domestic establishments, which is really incredible. And that ranges from food processing plants to facilities that manufacture life-saving medications. Also, countless individual products. So I appreciate that when it comes to keeping food and drugs safe and effective, you got to get it right, and you really got to get it right every single time, which is an incredible task. And that's, of course, why we provided the budgetary increases, that we have, which have been substantial over the last 10 years. And Americans expect that. I mean, they expect, you've set a high standard, and they expect that to be maintained in an ever more complex and interconnected world. So there's a lot of things we'll talk about today. Obviously, no shortage of food safety issues. I appreciate the steps you're taking in terms of the reorg. I know that's been a massive task, and we want to talk about how that's going. Also, I'm concerned in your budget plans for adequately funding state food inspectors, which we'll want to touch on. And then the drug shortage we're seeing across the country with various drugs, and that's something that we'll need to discuss here as well. Also, the rare diseases, lab-developed testing regulations, and, of course, artificial intelligence, right? So a lot of important topics in your job. It's kind of like you touch on everything and everybody every day. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Dr. Califf.
Thanks. Your comment about everything every day. I just had my 55th high school reunion, and everyone there had some opinion about what the FDA should or should not be doing, I can assure you. So Chairman Heinrich and Ranking Member Hoeven and members of the subcommittee, thanks for the chance to be here before you today. I do want to start by thanking the subcommittee for your continued support of the FDA. In a difficult fiscal environment, the agency greatly appreciates the subcommittee's sustained commitment to our mission. The budget I'm pleased to present to you today requests a total of $7.22 billion for the agency, an increase of $341 million above the FY2024 enacted levels. Looking ahead to FY2025, we intend to take significant new steps in our approach to addressing our numerous challenges, in particular through the largest reorganization in the history of the FDA. Virtually every component of the agency will be impacted in some way by the changes, which will affect over 8,000 of our 18,000 employees. At the center of this reorganization, we're building a newly unified human foods program. Following the independent evaluation by the Reagan-Udall Foundation and an internal review, we're bringing together human foods functions, resources, and personnel from across the agency, all under a single leader. Importantly, this new human foods program will create a clear line of authority. The new Deputy Commissioner has full decision-making authority over the entire program. We're also renaming the Office of Regulatory Affairs as the Office of Inspections and Investigations, signaling a refocusing of that office on its core function of inspections, investigations, and import operations, eliminating duplication and increasing efficiency in how we handle these activities. As part of this effort, we're shifting the Office of Regulatory Affairs, medical products, tobacco products, and specialty labs into the Office of the Chief Scientist to form a highly integrated network of laboratories and laboratory scientists that provide coordinated, cutting-edge regulatory science research and support for all of the FDA. Additionally, we're making a number of other realignments to further improve efficiency and communication across the agency, including moving cosmetics functions to the Office of the Chief Scientist, which is best positioned to support the scientific expertise necessary to review cosmetic ingredients and implement the new authorities provided under the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act. The FY2025 budget request will provide a solid foundation for these newly envisioned programmatic changes, as well as strengthen the agency's capacity to protect and promote a safe and secure U.S. food and medical product supply. Outside of the reorganization, we're also looking to make significant strides in other critical cross-cutting areas. For example, the past 4 years have demonstrated the importance of managing supply chains and mitigating shortages of critical products. Our FY25 budget requests $12.3 million for supply chain work across nearly all product areas, as well as establishing positions to coordinate these activities across the agency. Finally, I also want to emphasize the importance of the agency's modernization of IT infrastructure and data processes at the FDA. We're requesting an increase of $8.3 million to further build on our centralized enterprise data modernization capabilities, as well as $2 million to implement common business processes and data optimization. The rapidly changing world demands that our systems evolve to meet future needs. This includes the incorporation of computing advances like artificial intelligence and advanced cybersecurity methods to protect our data and information. The industries we regulate in our own workforce have focused on the use of AI coupled with better data and sophisticated computing infrastructure for innovative ways to benefit public health, from efforts to detect contamination patterns in screenings for imported food products to helping to identify potential cancer therapies for certain ultra-rare cancers. Finally, we've contributed significantly to the joint effort to deal with the highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak, and I'm pleased that our supply of milk products is safe. However, this virus, like all viruses, is mutating. We need to continue to prepare for the possibility that it might jump to humans. Thank you for inviting me today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Dr. Califf, why don't you start right there and just talk a little bit about what that preparation looks like?
Sure. First of all, it's important, as you all know, we've talked about One Health for a long time, the fact that we all live in a world and a universe where animals and humans are more and more connected because of international transportation, the fact that more people are living closer to farms and on farms. But this is a real example of One Health. Just roughly speaking, it's always a little more complicated than just the first take on it, but essentially the Agriculture Department regulates the cows, we regulate the milk at the FDA, and the CDC has primary responsibility for the health of the workers on the dairy farms. And so we all have to work together across these organizations and agencies to take care of things. And there's so many aspects, I can't go through it all, but primarily from the FDA perspective today, we are accountable for the milk. So when we heard about the problem, we needed to launch a program of testing the milk to make sure that it was safe, knowing that it was likely that there were more infected herds than we initially knew. And in fact, that's what we found. As you well know, when we looked at just milk before pasteurization, that is the raw milk coming into the bulk tanks, about 20% of a national sample turn out to have fragments of virus in it. And then the question was, is this infectious virus or is it essentially fragments of dead virus that had been taken care of by pasteurization? We had a good reason to believe pasteurization would work because of 100 years of pasteurized milk, and in fact it did. We found no evidence of live virus, and I'm pleased to say there are many NIH and Agriculture Department researchers around the country, universities, who were also looking, and we all found the same thing. But now, the other part that we're accountable for at HHS and within FDA is the countermeasures in case this does jump to humans. So we've got to have testing, got to have antivirals, and we need to have a vaccine ready to go. So we've been busy getting prepared for if the virus does mutate in a way that jumps into humans on a larger level. Throughout all of this, because there's so many agencies involved, countless hours of phone calls and Zoom conferences to make sure that we're all coordinated, all in an environment where, let's just say, it's not easy to get access to the farms because, people are understandably protective of the environments in which they work. So a lot of work across the agencies here, and I feel like it's been a good example of how One Health can come together.
Great. Dr. Califf, how do you see infant formula being managed under the new Human Foods Program?
Well, I'd really like to answer that question in two parts, and I think you may remember the day I was confirmed was the day of the Abbott recall, so it's not a very warm welcome to the FDA to hear that this was going to unfold. And so the first part is what we've already done, because just a comment about the reorganization. I'm sure we'll talk more about it with other questions, but we can't enact the reorganization until we get through congressional notification process. We're still waiting on one branch of the four corners to give us the okay. Then we have to negotiate or really reach agreement with the unions, which I don't think is going to be a big problem, but the unions that represent 80% of our employees have a right to have a say, and then we're ready to go. We're amassed at the starting line to really get going. We have hundreds of people across the FDA who have volunteered to be champions of change in this massive reorganization. But in the interim, because of the urgency of the infant formula issue, we've already done a lot of the work that we had to do. We now have many more people working within currently CFSAN, the food part of the FDA, on this sort of basic science and regulation that needs to go on, and we've beefed up the inspectorate. So they're called investigators at the FDA. We have a dedicated core. All of the infant formula facilities are being inspected at least once a year. in the case of the Abbott plant, there's a consent decree, so we're essentially there every day talking with them, and as issues come up, dealing with them jointly. But it's a whole different world now that the scientific experts, the investigators, and the leaders meet on a regular basis, plan the inspections, and when things are found, they're dealt with very quickly as compared to a process which, in the routine prior, it took some time to institute the changes. So, and we have, as you know, hired Jim Jones as head of the Human Foods Program, although it's not the Human Foods Program yet until we, and this better decision-making structure, there was nothing wrong with the people that were trying to make decisions before, but it was not optimally organized to lead to crisp decisions that would lead to action being taken.
Great. Ranking Member Hoven.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I feel like the question just always, with these issues, leads to more questions. On the avian flu, now, that has jumped to humans in some, I know there was a case in Texas, and it has gone from cattle to humans already in some cases, correct?
Yeah, so you might enjoy just a quick note about the biology here. Not that I'm a doctor, not a clinician, not a biological scientist, but the attachment of this virus is through receptors that deal with something called sialic acid that are ubiquitous in all animals, including people. And it turns out the human conjunctiva apparently is the one part of the human that right now is susceptible. And so the one case that we have was conjunctivitis, not a serious illness, but conjunctivitis. And that case has been worked up by the CDC as best they could. But like all viruses, it comes and goes. So you got to really catch it while the person is actively infected to do all the things that you'd like to do. The real worry is that it will jump to the human lungs, where when that has happened in other parts of the world for brief outbreaks, the mortality rate's been 25%. So 1 in 4, that's about 10 times worse than COVID. And so it's really, we don't control how the virus mutates, and it's just a mathematical, viruses are always mutating. It's a mathematical probabilistic thing whether the mutation will make it able to attach to these receptors in the human lining of the lung. That would make it perhaps transmissible through the airways, which would be really bad. So we have to be ready, and we have to do everything we can to limit the spread of the virus, which has gone around the world multiple times now in many different species. But there's debate, but there's a concern that when it invades cattle for the first time, which are closer to the human being than a bird, say, and the cattle are often intermingling with pigs on farms and with farm workers. A lot of the experts have told us they're particularly worried right now. So the public need not be worried. The risk is still low that will happen. But it's sort of like this may be a bad analogy, but I think of it having had relatives go through this. I would rather have the low deductible insurance than the high deductible insurance. That is, if we institute the countermeasures now and reduce the spread of the virus now, then we're much less likely to see a mutation that jumps to humans for which we're ill prepared. So the investment now and the careful attention to management of the herds on the farms is really, and part of our job at FDA, we'll have an active surveillance system on the milk so the public can be reassured that this, critical part of the food supply is staying safe.
So, it's moved from birds to cattle, and that process, you've got to be very careful. Cattle, possibly hogs, or ultimately to people. How do you create a barrier there that both, the actual animal and then the byproducts? How do you create a very good barrier there so people are comfortable you got this thing, contained or stopped from further migration?
Unfortunately, there's no absolute barrier that can be created, but there are elements of protection that are important, like farm workers, if they're on a farm with infected cattle. And One good thing here, the cattle don't die. The mortality rate of cows is, with this virus, is less than 1% from what we're told. So the cattle will recover. But the workers need to be protected with PPE, just like we all went through with hospital workers with COVID when you're around animals that are infected. In the poultry industry, as you may know, they've already been through this.
Right.
And the use of PPE is just routine in the poultry industry. But this is new for the cattle industry, and so there's a lot of work to be done to get to the right place there.
Is this our future with viruses, where we're just going to have to be, with across the board, having that kind, the equipment and the garb and everything to stop it? Is it?
There's such a hard balance here for people like me, because it's 25 years. If you look at all the literature and the establishment in the government of elements of protecting against future pandemics, this has been predicted. It's just a matter of time. I mean, it happened in 1918. That was probably a very similar incident of bird to human or something like that. And so we're going to see these things cycle through, and what we want is to be better and better at dealing with it when it happens. And as we learn measures to prevent it from happening, try to do it. But like I say, there is no absolute barrier that we know of now. So it's when there's an outbreak, containing it, which that would mean, for example, what's happening now is not shipping. I'm not an expert on cattle ranching, but cows get sold all the time and move across state lines. So containing it means if you got an infected herd, not doing that, and that's happening now, and I think it's been successful. But it also means having those countermeasures ready to go. So you got the antivirals, the vaccines, the monoclonal antibodies ready to go, just in case it happens. So it's not new. It's going to be part of our lives. It probably happened a lot more historically in ways that we didn't even know, because we didn't have ways of measuring it.
Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. You mentioned your high school reunion. I'm heading to a big reunion in a couple weekends, and I'm sure I'm going to hear everyone will have an opinion on what should be happening in Congress. You're hearing from your old classmates. Anyways, thank you for joining us today, Commissioner. And I'm going to continue on the same theme that previous senators have asked, because I represent America's Dairyland. The outbreak of avian flu in dairy herds in the United States is a significant issue. Wisconsin's home to over 5,000 dairy farms, dairy herds, and roughly 22% of the nation's total herd count. So this is a big deal for us. As you can imagine, Wisconsin farmers and dairy producers are concerned about its potential to spread to their own operations. 2 weeks ago, I sent you a letter requesting robust coordination and communication on highly pathogenic avian influenza in order to protect our nation's farmers, workers, and dairy supply chain. So I'm really interested in, you outlined already the different agencies that have a role in this: human health, health of the herd, health of the food supply. Please talk about that coordination and communication and how it's happening.
Well, I would point to multiple levels of coordination. At the highest level, the OPPR, which you all helped create through legislation in the White House, coordinates across agencies. I mean, as you all know, the Agriculture Department is a separate department, where FDA is within Health and Human Services. And so there's an office there which has a call every single day where leaders, in fact, I'm missing the call today, but the leaders of each of the relevant agencies review what's happened the previous day, what the plan is, and what the long-term plan is. And then within HHS, because we have CDC, ASPR, and FDA in particular, who have to be involved, we have a separate call every day just for the HHS part of it to make sure that we have our act together as it relates to human health. And we, of course, at FDA, we have a cross thing because we also have the Center for Veterinary Medicine
Right.
and the animal involvement. So there is a lot of coordination. I think it's going well and it's very strategic, but we do have some hurdles. And I just say, well, beyond that, you also know that the states play a huge role in the management of the safety of the food and farms in particular. And so we're constantly in touch with all the regulators in the states, and every state system is different in terms of how it's configured. So access to the farms, for example, is something that really has to be negotiated through the states. The farmers and the owners of dairy farms are more comfortable with people that they know that are in their state. So all this has to be coordinated. I feel like we're doing a good job of that.
Let me just ask a little bit. You talked about the difficulty in getting access to the farms, but you mentioned earlier the ability to test unpasteurized and then test pasteurized milk. Are you having any difficulty at the processing stage of getting that access?
The pasteurized milk is absolutely no problem to test because we just
Right.
we have people that go to stores and buy milk off the shelves
Yep.
anyway for all sorts of other testing. As I'm sure you know from the state that you're in, you have all these cows. The milk goes into bulk tanks, which is
Yep.
a mixture of a number of cows. And that's a very sensitive area because it does point, if they're infected cows, as to where the infections are. And technically, it's no problem, but we want to make sure that we have trust. And so there's negotiation that needs to go on to make sure that there's a safe way to handle the data and that people are not going to be castigated if they happen to have an infected herd. So we're working through all that state by state.
Okay. And can you share if you need any resources in order to increase your testing and treatment capacity?
Well, as you might imagine, we've expended a lot of resources in the absence of any additional funding, and we're keeping track of that and looking at potential sources within, in our case, within HHS, for example. I think it's predictable that we're going to be in a new environment for milk in particular because of this virus, the way it's affected other species as it sort of cycles around. And one thing about cattle, they don't, there are always new cattle coming up, so there are always going to be naive cattle that are susceptible to getting infected. So it's predictable there will be a need for resources. We're keeping track of things, and as we get a handle on what we need to do going forward, we'll keep you completely informed about where we stand, including the reserve opportunities within HHS.
Thank you, Dr. Califf.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today, Dr. Califf. I want to talk about medical gases. I hate to drive this nail into the wall, but I have not seen any movement on this issue, so we're going to continue to pursue this because I have constituents in Mississippi that this really affects. I have repeatedly brought up the issue of medical gas, whether in previous hearings and several letters, and my colleagues and I continue to push on this issue. Congress required the FDA to update its regulations for medical gases in July of 2016. And almost 8 years later, the FDA has still failed to fulfill its obligation to the millions of American patients who rely on medical gas daily. My colleagues and I have consistently encouraged the FDA to meet its statutory requirement and promulgate rules for medical gases. But instead, the FDA continues to regulate medical gases under regulations written for traditional pharmaceuticals that do not share the unique characteristics of this category of drug products. While I appreciate the fact that the FDA finally issued its long overdue proposed rule for medical gases in 2022, This month will mark 2 years since the rule was even published. The FDA only received 4 public comments, and yet your agency still has not published final rulemaking. And there's just really no excuse for the delay. It's time to finalize the rule. So what is your plan for publishing a final rulemaking in the 2024 calendar year?
Yeah, I'm not going to beat around the bush about this. I distinctly remember you bringing this up last year, and I also told you that time, it was a long time ago, but I was actually a co-founder of a medical gas company. So, the company no longer exists, so I don't have any conflict related to this, but I feel like I have a good understanding of it. What I'd say is just a couple of quick things. This rule involves every single part of FDA, and there has been a lot of negotiation that need to go on to make sure that we get it right as it affects things like veterinary health and biologics and devices and drugs, all relevant here. I also say we have a published date to have this concluded by October of 2024.
So October of 2024 is when we can expect the final rule?
I'd say before then.
Wonderful, wonderful news, because I don't want to have to ask it again next year.
I know you don't, and I don't want to have to take the question again. I'd love to see this thing out, and I can't give you the exact date, but I think you'll be.
Okay, that's good enough, and I still have some time left, and I want to talk about the illegal advance prescribing. I've repeatedly brought to your attention to the dangers the women face when allowed dangerous life-ending chemical abortion drugs, which can be ordered by consumers through the mail or purchased in retail pharmacies without ever seeing a doctor in person. My husband has a doctor's appointment Friday morning for a sinus medication that he can't get refilled until he sees a doctor. So it blows me away that you can get this with no doctor oversight, and it is a drug that will literally cause you intentionally to have an abortion and end your pregnancy and the life of that child. The FDA is supposed to protect Americans from taking medications that could be harmful. However, you continue to look the other way and claim that mifepristone is safe, in part based on the lack of reports of non-fatal adverse events due to the FDA's own relaxed reporting requirements and continue to allow women to put their lives at risk in the name of the pro-abortion agenda. And it has been reported on more than one instance that American women are stockpiling the abortion pills through advanced prescribing from abortion companies and providers. And according to another article in Politico, an FDA spokesperson stated that the FDA is concerned about the advanced prescribing of mifepristone and that mifepristone is not approved for advanced provision of a medical abortion. It's not even approved for that, and they can get it without even seeing a doctor. So what concerns does the FDA have with the advanced prescribing of this mifepristone? And is it true that the FDA has not approved mifepristone for advanced provisions of an abortion? And I have 2 follow-up questions with that.
Well, I know you're aware that I'm limited in what I can say because the issues around this are currently under consideration by the Supreme Court.
But what is FDA doing?
Well, remember that, first of all, just one technical point to make is that there has to be a prescription. The companies can't write prescriptions, so it's doctors that are writing the
Without
prescription.
seeing a doctor, though. Without physically seeing the doctor, they can just write the prescription with no visit, like the sinus medication that he has to go in to see the doctor.
I mean, remember that we don't regulate the practice of medicine, so there has to be a doctor that writes the prescription. The conditions under which that is done are
But when they're violating the law by allowing them to stockpile, what is your responsibility then?
we don't advocate stockpiling as a method, but we don't regulate the practice of medicine.
So you have no role whatsoever in preventing the stockpiling of this?
I don't know how we would.
Senator, your time has expired.
Thank you.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Califf, good to see you again here. In 2021, the FDA found that some infant formula products had been released to the public while contaminated with Chronobacter. This didn't just cause widespread panic and a nationwide formula shortage. It also revealed, I think, the effects of a glaring problem, that the FDA does not currently have the authority to inspect infant formula until after the product has left the manufacturer's control. FDA's two past budgets have requested additional authority to require industry to conduct testing of final infant formula products, and I've been working on legislation to provide this authority that is so essential for you to protect infant formula. The bill would require infant formula manufacturers to test for key contaminants before releasing their product out to the public and give positive test results to the FDA. So my question for you, sir, is if the FDA had the authority to test infant formula products before they went out to the market, how would that prevent future recalls and potential supply chain difficulties like we saw during 2021 infant formula crisis?
Really do appreciate the question and the background there. You are correct that there is no requirement of reporting to the FDA the results of testing that companies do. Even if they find bacteria, they're accountable for getting rid of those lots and not putting them into circulation. But it would really help us a lot if there were a requirement for testing, and if the tests are positive, that we be notified. So in the case of the recall that we had, there were just a lot of bad conditions in that one plant. We would have known about that a lot earlier had we known about the results of testing the companies do. And I might add, this in most of our regulatory paradigms, the first line of defense is the industry that we regulate. Like in the production of medications, we don't test every lot of medications, but the company that manufactures the drug is required to do it and to have the records available for us to look at. And we'd like to see the same thing happen not only with infant formula, but also with regard to all critical foods, particularly for children. You're aware that we recently had the contaminated applesauce with lead. So we are asking Congress to give us the authority to require that that be done.
Right. Thank you. Last year, one of my constituents, Sandra Izenga, lost her life after being treated for a tuberculosis infection with a contaminated bone graft from Ozeo Biologics. Her case, I think, just shows how dangerous it is when TB is spread through the transplantation of human cells, tissue, as well as cellular-based products. Inspected lots were not just sent to Michigan, but also to California, Louisiana, New York, Oregon, and Texas. And this was the second outbreak from this company, which is also responsible for a 2021 outbreak that infected 80 and killed 8 people. I remain concerned that we're not doing enough to stop the spread of TB through transplantation of human cells, issues in cellular-based products. And that's why I've introduced legislation that would conduct an educational campaign about the risk associated with human cell and tissue transplants, and it would allow for civil monetary penalties for companies that violate compliance standards similar to that of traditional medical devices or tobacco products. So my question for you, sir, is does the FDA have the resources it needs to ensure that all registered human cell and tissue establishments are being properly inspected?
Again, I really appreciate the work you're putting into this, and I'll just say the issue of cell and tissue therapy is one of the most promising things that we have in our armamentarium of developing treatments to prevent and treat human disease. But it also has a downside, and it gets very complicated because it intersects with the practice of medicine issues and very complicated interpretation of regulations about the type of tissue used and how much it falls into a category more like a drug or a device in terms of the way it's regulated. So your efforts to clarify this are much appreciated. It's a focus of ours. The civil monetary penalties will be a big help to us because it's murky, it gives bad actors a chance to do bad things in a way that's hard for us to stop when we have so many good actors who are doing so much good with this type of treatment. Also applaud your efforts at education. It is a complicated area. When you hear about stem cells and cell therapy and such, it's very exciting, but the details are important, and if there are, like I say, some people not acting above board in this regard, I don't want that to detract from the majority of people who are really breaking new ground in ways that are going to be very good for human health.
Right, absolutely. But we do have to have the oversight, so I appreciate it. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Califf, last year during your previous testimony for the committee, the FDA held an advisory committee meeting on opioids, which you know is extremely devastating to this entire country, especially to my state of West Virginia. In particular, the questionable clinical trial practice known as enriched enrollment. The enriched enrollment process has made it significantly easier for FDA to approve opiates and allow for broad marketing to the public. The process removes the patients with pre-existing opiate sensitives from clinical trials instead of sticking with traditional double-blind studies. This has skewed results and seriously underestimates risks associated with the proposed drug involved in the clinical trial. The advisory committee last year expressed concerns during the meeting about the enriched enrollment is able to really address whether an opiate is better than a non-opiate. In September, I sent you a letter asking for an update on FDA and during a response to these concerns. We haven't heard a thing. So what have you done and in response to concerns raised regarding the enriched enrollment?
Well, Senator, thanks for the question. As we've discussed before, I'm a clinical trialist by profession. It's been my whole career, so I certainly understand the issue that you're raising. And you know that we had the advisory committee meeting. The advice is publicly available, and we take it seriously. I don't think you'll see enriched enrollment as a practice in the routine management of the affairs of opioids. There are other circumstances in medicine and healthcare where it's a very important
Well, let me go
constituent of the armamentarium of clinical trial methods that are important to have available.
Well, let me go into this then. And one of the recommendations in the external review of the FDA regulations of opioids report that you ordered was to ensure the FDA be as transparent as possible regarding decision-making, which I appreciate. Advisory committees present complex scientific reviews of safety and efficacy of medicines. And most patients and the general public really don't have a background to fully understand the scientific studies which you're explaining. But the FDA announced that it will be holding a listening session on June 13th to discuss the role of advisory committees specifically to improve the public understanding. One element that you have stated is to reduce voting. How can you reduce voting with these scientists and like yourself being in that position before if you can't vote to where you think something's effective or not? And that leads into another question. I can never believe this happened, okay, was Zohydro. When Zohydro, I don't think you were there at this time, 11-2, the advisory committee voted against putting this product on the market. And at that time, I think she was the head, Woodcock was the head of it, did it anyway. And I could not believe it, could not believe it. So if you take voting out of the process, what would be that?
I don't know, Senator, I don't know of anyone who's, first of all, as a clinical scientist, the epitome, the peak of my academic career was being on the Cardiorenal Advisory Committee where everything comes together. I don't know of anyone who's advocating taking voting completely away.
Let's reduce voting.
Let's remember, advisory committees are to give advice to the FDA, often not about a particular product, but about a field, how to think about a field where the vote doesn't particularly have a purpose. In addition to that, what the FDA is most interested in is what the advisory committee is thinking, what's behind the reasoning for the way they feel the way they do. That's much more important than the sort of excitement of having a vote from people that have convened for one day without all of the background that the FDA has been meeting and looking at the data for months. So the advisory committees are very important. I'm a big proponent of having them. We just need to make sure that they're meeting the purpose for which they exist. And with regard to votes that go the other way, if we always took the advice of advisory committees, wouldn't need the FDA, just convene an advisory committee. So
These are scientists give you a different opinion. The only thing I look at an advisory committee, these are people that are not beholding to the company that's asking you to approve a new patent or whatever it may be.
Well,
and
there are
let me
people
just say this: the thing, because our time is very limited, and the thing that the opiate is just a scourge on our society, and it's been for quite some time. It's devastated my state in ways that you can't even believe, and what it's done around the country. We kill more people with overdoses than we have in any wars we've ever fought in, starting back from the Civil War. But I can't never figure out, why do we allow, and evaluate if a new product is coming on the market, your job is to make sure it's an improved product that'll reduce the suffering of humans. It's better for society. And these products keep coming at you all, and they're not taking anything off. If something's going to improve and be better, then don't you think something should be removed from the market? They're just flooding the market with the things they've had forever, killing Americans and killing West Virginians, and bringing more things to do more damage.
Well, let me just say, my staff is available to yours, and I think they are talking.
Sure.
And as frequently as possible, in my view. We need a legal construct if we're going to pull things off the market.
We'll work with you on that. If you're telling me we have to do something, you need legislation here to pull things off the market once they've been approved, and even though something's replacing it's better?
I really, Senator, as I've aged in this job, I really believe
we're all aging right now.
We at FDA are referees primarily. The rule book is written by Congress, so when you write a law, we follow the law.
Fair enough.
Let me mention one other. Just you may be prepared to ask about this. The issue of, personally, I'm very much in favor of something you've advocated for, which is for a new opioid to come on the market, as opposed to all other drugs in classes of drugs. It ought to have an advantage over we don't need more opioids on the market. I think we agree on that.
Yes, we do.
Unless there's something that's really a significant advantage. But right now, the rule book that we referee upon says if the drug is better for the indication than nothing, then it's allowed on the market. And
so you need language basically saying, is it an improved drug that that'll perform better than the existing drug, so we'll remove the existing drug?
That's right.
Okay, got it.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to do a quick second round, so if you want to stick around, we can have some more conversation about this. Doctor, I don't want to put you in a situation with regard to the Supreme Court decision, but I do want to ask you just patently, is mifepristone safe?
I'm on the record multiple times about this. We stand by the decisions of the FDA over the years and the constant looking at the surveillance data and clinical trials as they come in. Mifepristone is safe and effective for its indication, and we stand by that.
Thank you. Talk to me about vaccine development and HPAI, and I know your role is to approve vaccines, but where are we in that process? And if we do have a zoonotic transmission to humans, what is our posture, and are we ready for that?
I'd say we're ready. You'll notice that part of the budget, as sort of separate from the rest of the budget, is the pandemic preparedness part of the budget. The way I look at it is we are in an enviable position compared to any time in the history of the world. Senator Hoeven rhetorically, I think, made the point that pandemics have always been around. It's just that now, because they used to be limited by the fact people didn't travel, now we're on airplanes, and as we saw with COVID, it moves quickly from one place to another. The enviable position we're in now is we have mRNA templates that are platforms that we have confidence in already, where what used to be a mystery, how do you make a vaccine by the old method that would take many months, now we can do it in just a few weeks to a couple of months. But we got to have the funding to keep the source warm so that we can start up right away. And that's part
that
of what's
mRNA platform is applicable in this case.
Yes, sir.
Great.
And it, you know, it's a great thing for many of the viruses are relatively simple compared to other kinds of organisms. So coming up with a matching vaccine for the exact genetic makeup of the virus is entirely possible in a very short period of time. So it's another place, I didn't mention the NIH before, it's a critical player here. The NIH is doing a lot of the background work to characterize the virus with its excellent virologists so that we can be ready working with the industry that makes the vaccines.
Talk to me a little bit about vaping. Why are we not making faster progress on the incredible number of unapproved vaping products that are on the market?
If you'll bear with me for just a minute, I'd like to sort of go through my thinking on this because I'm as frustrated as you are with it. I have to live with it every day, and I have relatives that are addicted to nicotine. I'm from South Carolina and practiced medicine in maybe the seat of the tobacco industry in the past in Durham. So first of all, I do want to point out that we're making progress in combustible tobacco, although we're still going to lose almost 500,000 Americans this year to tobacco-related illness. That and hypertension are the two biggest remediable causes of death that we're dealing with. But just as we're making that kind of progress with combustible tobacco, along came vaping. It was 2016 during my first term that we deemed vaping, but we had no idea it was going to result in 26 million applications for vaping products that happened while I was away at Alphabet, and I came back to find the Center for Tobacco Products full of good, hardworking people, but an overwhelming number of applications from an industry. I was in Silicon Valley, I must say. The combination of an addictive substance called nicotine with marketing done through Silicon Valley techniques was overwhelming. We had a Reagan-Udall report. We have a new head of the Center for Tobacco Products, Brian King, and we've made tremendous progress in this regard. But just as we're getting a handle on the basics of vaping, and by the way, at least by the surveys, the number of teenagers vaping did decline last year, but it's nowhere where it needs to be. Just as we're making that progress, along comes the Chinese manufacturing of vaping products, and the overwhelming vaping products now used by American youth and getting addicted is made in China. So can I go one more minute on this?
Please.
Here we have products that are not legal to sell to Chinese people in China, made in China, and imported into the United States in large numbers. Now, the old regime of dealing with this, one of you had mentioned several 100,000 establishments. It's actually 1 million, because we have 300,000 retail stores selling vaping products in the United States. If we take our 1,400 investigators, i.e. inspectors, and try to have them manage 300,000 vaping establishments, that's math doesn't work. So we got to stop this at the point of import. So we're actively working now with, you talk about multiple agencies, Justice Department. Remember, we can't enforce without the Justice Department agreement if we have to go to court on these issues. And CBP, the border force, is very important here. So I want to work with you all to come up with a way, and you would be amazed if you saw what we have to go through to take action with one product coming into the International Mail Facility. It's a very complicated legal proceeding because every company has a right to defend itself in court from actions that we take. I think the circumstance here where you have a product that China won't sell to its own people being imported into the United States to addict youth, we ought to be able to come up with a way to say it's pretty simple. When it comes in, destroy it. And CBP, by the way, can recover the money from the importer for an illegal product. It's an authority that we don't have at the FDA. So we're actively working on that mix. I don't blame
If you need
for
additional authorities from Congress or additional direction to make sure that we're addressing this in a more efficient way, I think you would find a very receptive audience.
I wish I could tell you exactly what it is now, but it will be very shortly. We'll have a composite view from the Justice Department, the FDA, and Border Patrol about what would be most effective.
Yeah.
I want to just cut it off, just not even let it in. Then we can deal with the vaping industry in the United States, which has many additional issues, but at least we could deal with that.
Okay. Senator Murray.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you, Commissioner Califf. Good to see you again. As I always say, every time families head out to the grocery store or sit down for a meal, they're putting their trust in the FDA. The health and safety of our nation depend on the world-class experts at FDA who work diligently to protect our food supply, address threats like shortages or contaminants, and a lot more. The stakes are always high, as we saw during the infant formula crisis, something I want to see FDA to do more to learn from, because no parent should ever worry about whether the formula that they feed their baby is safe. So I'm glad we have this opportunity to talk about the resources your agency needs to fulfill its really important mission. Before I start my questions, I also want to say one thing I think we both agree on, your agency does not need, and that is political interference in FDA's science-driven decision-making processes. We've seen a number of baseless claims and disinformation from anti-abortion activists and some Republican lawmakers, which are really threatening to undermine FDA's credibility and its authority. So let me set the record straight, and Dr. Califf, I hope you will continue to as well. Mifepristone is safe, it is effective, and that's just not me saying that. It is scientists, experts, and decades of data. Republican politicians should not be overruling experts on science or overruling women about their own health care decisions. And at a time when women across the country are facing rampant attacks on abortion access, this dangerous disinformation is an attack we all can and all should be fighting loudly and clearly. I just wanted that on the record, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Califf, you, before I got here, talked a little bit about H5N1 avian flu. This is something that Senator Burr and I put together, the Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy, and we got funding for it in the last bill. Can you talk a little bit about how your agency is coordinating with OPPR and other federal agencies?
Yes, as we discussed just a few minutes ago, OPPR has been the central coordinator of the effort across agencies that have boundaries that have to be overcome to work together. So the Agriculture Department is in an entirely different sphere than FDA and CDC, which are within HHS. So there's a daily call. I'm actually missing it today for this hearing of the leaders of and the top leaders, in addition to the key people who carry out the operations, where what happened the day before is reviewed, what needs to be done that day is reviewed, and the long-term plans are made. So I'm glad that you put together the plan. I just hope that the funding is adequate in the future, because, as Senator Hoeven pointed out, we're going to continue to have outbreaks and pandemics for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you. On cosmetics reform, I was really glad that we provided $7 million for the implementation of the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act of 2022 that I negotiated and got signed into law. That bill, for the first time, provided much-needed new authority to FDA to make sure that families know the products we put on our bodies every day are safe. I wanted to ask you today what steps the agency has taken over the last year to implement those new authorities and what resources are requested in your budget for this year.
Well, first of all, thanks for doing that. I think it was decades of trying before this finally happened. And people tend to think of cosmetics as just something you put on your skin for looks. But the skin, the quiz of the day, the skin is the largest organ in the human body, and it absorbs what's put on it. And so there's good reason to at least know what's in the cosmetics that you're using. I'm pleased to say we made a decision to put cosmetics in the Office of the Chief Scientist under the purview of Dr. Namanje Bumpus, who's our Chief Scientist, who, by the way, I just was pleased to elevate to Principal Deputy. She's done such a great job. progress we've made really exceeded what we had planned. That is for the first year, which is that we now have the listing. So there's a place for the cosmetics companies to list that they're on the market and what's in them. And there's also an adverse event reporting system for the first time. We were able to capitalize on CEDAR's drug adverse reporting system to put one in quickly. We've definitely, this is done on a shoestring, and in the budget, we have an $8 million ask to really instantiate this office and get to the next level. As you also know, there's several cosmetics that are very worrisome in terms of health, where we have to do a lot of work in order to take the kind of actions that are needed to protect health, and we need a budget to make sure those things can be done.
Well, thank you, and this is something really important to me, so I appreciate the work that this committee did on that. I understand that the proposed Unified Human Foods Program continues to make its way through the administrative process. It's been well documented that these reforms are overdue. FDA's regulation and enforcement of food safety standards on issues ranging from bacteria in vegetables to arsenic in baby food are really critical. What is your agency requesting in FY25 for implementation of the reorganization?
Well, in this budget, we're asking for an additional $15 million, and I honestly regard that as a hope-for down payment. I think you'll, if you go to the Reagan-Udall report, you'll see beautiful graphs, although they're somewhat depressing, of the funding of the drug and the medical products side of the FDA. Thanks to the user fees, it's, meeting the mark. It could always be better, but the food side of the FDA has been increased, but well below even the cost of living inflationary increase at a time when the foods industry is increasingly complex, global, interdigitated, with many issues. So part of what we're doing in the reorg is to create a budget where you can really see exactly what the money's being spent on. I recognize when I came in, when I asked for the budget, on the medical product side, it was really clear because the user fees institute a business-like process, whereas on the food side, there was a lot of intermixing in ways that were harder to depict. I think when you all see the places where it's needed, and I'll just point to two examples that I think are really critical. We all know that we're in a global environment where more and more things are getting into the food in the way of chemicals. We chose Jim Jones to be our leader of the Human Foods Program. He has a history in the EPA of dealing with chemical contamination. We had basically a tiny little crew of people working on that on the food side of the FDA. So as you see what's at stake and what needs to be done, I hope that will make clear, what funding is needed, and also give you a way to make sure when you invest money that you can actually see what's being done. The other one that's enormous is nutrition. We talk about 3 pillars of risk. Obviously, microbial, which everyone understands, chemicals, which are a great concern. But our biggest cause of death and disability from food is actually bad nutrition. And we've got this tremendous epidemic of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer emanating from all that. In a setting in which our tools on the nutrition side are very limited. So we're going to have a Center of Excellence in Nutrition. Nested in that is going to be the Critical Foods group that was mandated in Fedora that will deal with infant formula and medical foods. So hopefully this will all clarify where the money is actually going to be useful as opposed to just asking for money based on a broad concept.
Okay, thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for the extra time.
Absolutely. Ranking Member Hoven.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So Senator Peters and I are working on some legislation in regard to infant formula. He's really coming at it from the safety end. I'm coming at it from adequacy, so we want to make sure it's helpful to you, doesn't impose costs and restrictions that would be counterproductive. Do you have any specific thoughts in regard to that?
The safety side is pretty straightforward, as you know, and there's just some things that we need. And again, just to reemphasize, as I learned at my high school reunion, people think the FDA has magical powers to just march in and force people.
And
to
at the
do-
reunion, you told them, in fact, you did.
No, I was asking for sympathy, actually.
Okay.
But so the safety side is, we just need a few more things that would require that first line of defense that we always depend on, which is the industry doing what it should do, and our checking to make sure they're doing what they should do. On the adequacy part, it is really complicated. And I would just say, I look forward to working with you. I have ideas. It's very complicated by the WIC program and the way the states purchase the formula. Many of us believe that the industry is too concentrated in a few companies, but
Right.
it also turns out if you look globally in every country, there are just a couple of companies that dominate in each company. And we have programs now to entice people into the market, but if half the market in every state is WIC, it's very hard for new entrants to actually get a foothold and have enough sales. So these are daunting problems, and we would love to work with you. It's not our primary responsibility, but we obviously have opinions, and it affects us when it's not working.
Right, that's what we want to do. Drug shortages, in your opinion, what's the greatest challenges you face in this space, and how can we improve that?
The answer is kind of similar, but let me break it in half. We have a set of things that I regard as the hole plugging activities. That's our primary issue there. When we know of an impending shortage, and there are over 200 per year happening now, we have a set of maneuvers we can do that are much like you would do if you were in a town and the grocery store was going out of business. You need to find another grocery store. We get on the phone, we go to all resources to find alternatives, either to produce the same product or a drug that is equivalent. And we need some help there from you all in filling in the holes in our knowledge base that would enable us to put together what we need to plug the holes much more efficiently. And we've asked for an additional $12 million in the budget for analysts and people to basically anticipate when shortages may occur so we can preempt. We're successful in preempting about 80 to 90% of the shortages, but we still have too many that are occurring. But part two is actually the big deal, and it's very much like what I said about the formula. We have a market failure, and it's very hard to, just to quickly go through this, it's really important to understand that we have two industries, essentially, with some overlap, but two industries in the pharmaceutical arena. The innovator industries make patented drugs, which have protection from patents from competition.
Right.
I believe the price is too high there. I know there are different opinions about that, but let's just say that the profits are good, and there's every incentive for the companies to make every drug they can sell because they make money. The 95% of our prescriptions now are generic drugs, and they're essentially copies of the innovator drug after the patent is over. It's a simple way to think about it. The prices there are too low. Our generic prices are actually lower than Canada and Europe. And so the shortages we're seeing, the probability of a shortage is directly related to how low the price is. Now, I'm a capitalist American. Just put yourself in the shoes of a CEO and say, you can either make a drug that's going to make a big profit for your company, or you can make a drug where you're guaranteed to lose money because the price is too low. Which one are you going to do? So the companies, even in India, where the cost of labor is so low, they're telling us they can't make and distribute the product at the price they're getting. And in the middle of all this, in America, of course, is the middleman, the GPOs and PBMs, which I know you all have been talking about. They're not regulated by anybody right now, basically, and this is an area where work needs to be done. It's not my job to say exactly what should be done. Of course, I have ideas like I do about infant formula. But unless we fix the market failure, we at FDA are going to be expending more and more energy just plugging holes in the system that we could have predicted were going to happen in the first place. But we can't tell anyone to make a drug. We don't make the drugs ourselves. So we're just trying to line up the people that do make them in a way that can be successful.
I want to follow up with you on that disparity in terms of the pricing between, the new name brand patent-protected drug and the generic. I'd not heard that point on the generic before, so that's interesting. I think it's something we'll try to follow up with you and understand better. But I think the drug shortage is important. We want to find ways to address it that are actually effective for consumers and don't create, market distortions or burdens.
If I may, I'd refer you to an HHS report that came out just a few weeks ago that goes through this in great detail. And I think if your staff reads it, that they probably already have, but get a briefing on it because I think it'll give you a lot of insight into what's happening here. And I'm personally traveling over to India because we're very dependent now on foreign manufacturing of these products because there's not enough.
Which is a concern as well.
Yeah, it should be.
Thank you.
Senator Manchin.
Very carefully, very quickly on that. Do we produce any antibiotics here in America? Someone told me a strep throat could take us down.
Not many.
And has the alarm been raised why we should have some manufacturing producing the necessities for us just off the basic?
I feel like from the day I came into this job this time, I have been screaming and shouting from the rooftops. But I mean, as you know, Senator, you've had family in the generic drug business.
They were they had to close down the plant because they had too many drugs they were producing.
Right. I mean, your cost of labor in West Virginia is competitive, I'll just say, and yet you still couldn't keep that going. And so
they were taken down because of FDA. Yeah. They were back then. It just made them impossible because they have so many drugs they were producing. They were producing those by the billions, but we don't even do any of that anymore. I just think it's a horrible situation, and I've talked to Secretary Becerra about this, and basically we have manufacturers who want to get back in business, making that and stockpiling it, so we do have it here in America made. The other thing I want to mention to you, on December 22nd and 22, which was basically the fiscal year 2023 omnibus bill that we passed, it included my freed of Opioids Act, which requires the FDA to review how they approve new opioid drugs. So that is in the law, okay? Now, also May 26th at that same time, and right now it's the Support Act, it passed the HELP Committee. And the Support Act, I think, does what you want. It was myself, Senator Braun. It's ensuring the FDA fully examines clinical trial impact and vitalness before endorsement act, which is the EFFECT Act, which would allow the Food and Drug Administration to deny a new drug application for an opioid analgesic drug on the basis of the drugs not being clinically superior to other commercially available drugs. Would that help? That bill, that bill's gone through the gambit. We just got to attach it to something right now.
Yeah, we'll have to get with your staff. There are always details in these things.
Well, Audrey will be happy to reach out.
The basic concept is this is an exception to the rule for opiates, but I think the destruction and deaths that you've talked about merit it in this case.
Well, sir, what's happening is this. I mean, I understand the lobbying force up here, and Big Pharma and all that, but the bottom line is there's a lot of drugs we depend on, and I support them 1,000%. This is one, I never grew up with it. I never had, these things weren't on the market when I was a kid. I got taken care of pretty good. When I was in the hospital, if I ever went to the hospital, they took care of me what I needed. When I got out of the hospital, I couldn't get, if I still liked what they gave me in the hospital, I couldn't get it anywhere else. So all of a sudden, we know the history on that one, but we have a couple of things here we would like to work with you on. I think that you might have some powers already, and we're trying to give you more. Let's make sure this other one's done the right way. Okay? Thank you, sir.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Gulf shrimp industry is very important to Mississippi, Dr. Califf. And right now, because of bad actors in other countries, Mississippi shrimpers and processors don't know if they're going to survive another season. And this is a real situation. I was on the coast night before last in Mississippi. And the primary reason for this is that many foreign countries unfairly subsidize shrimp production and dump shrimp onto the market at prices that domestic producers can't compete with because we do not subsidize. Ecuador is one of the primary bad actors, and shrimp imports from Ecuador are growing faster than imports from any other country. It's also important for inspection of imported shrimp to be robust, especially during times like these when Gulf shrimpers are struggling so much with unfair trade practices. I was happy to see that in August 2023, FDA signed a regulatory partnership agreement with Ecuador to strengthen food safety in shrimp intended for the U.S. market. This is important both for public health and for the future of our domestic shrimp industry. Domestic shrimpers should not have to compete with unfair trade practices, but they should especially not have to compete with shrimp riddled with illegal or dangerous chemicals and drugs. What percentage of imports from Ecuador has FDA inspected since this arrangement was signed, and have any imports been refused to your knowledge?
Sorry, I'd have to get back with you on this exact numbers, but I sure agree with you that, first of all, you all gave us additional funding to implement programs like this. We have to keep foreign imports to the same standards that we have in the U.S., and the more we can get these countries to do a good job on their own, the better off we're going to be in terms of using our resources to double check and make sure things are okay. So the agreement with Ecuador is the first of 3 that we hope to have. The other 2 big importers are India and Indonesia. Very similar issues there. You're right, over 90% of our shrimp that we eat now is imported. Personally, when I eat shrimp and grits, as we discussed last year, it's South Carolina or North Carolina shrimp are my preference, but I put Louisiana and Mississippi right up there too. And I agree with everything you said about needing to fortify the industry here. As you well know, we don't, our remit is not within the economics of the industry. We have to regulate whatever the economics are dictating, but we do have this obligation that you refer to keep the chemicals out. But we'll get back to you with the details of the number of inspections and what's been done in the way of detecting things and preventing them from getting into the country if they're not up to snuff.
Thank you. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you, Commissioner Califf, for being here today, and I look forward to working with you and the members of this committee as we work through this year's appropriations process. For members, questions for the record are due by next Wednesday, the 15th of May, and we'd appreciate responses back from FDA within 30 days. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.